my fiancée, and her mother had been planning to steal everything I owned, and I was about to hand it all over with a smile on my face. What I discovered 24 hours before our wedding day changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the people closest to me. I'm telling this story because I need people to understand what really happened. For months, I've been painted as the villain in this tale, the man who destroyed his own wedding and broke his fiancée's heart. But sometimes the truth is messier than the story people want to believe. My name is David, and until 18 months ago, I lived in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone else's business. I owned a successful construction company that my father had built from nothing, and I had recently inherited a substantial amount of money and property from my grandmother. On paper, I was what people might call a good catch. I was 32, financially stable, and desperately in love with a woman named Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She was beautiful, charming, and had this way of making everyone in a room feel like they were the most important person there. We met at a charity fundraiser where she was volunteering, and I was immediately drawn to her warmth and apparent kindness. She worked as a part-time receptionist at a local clinic, and she always talked about wanting to do more with her life but never having the opportunities. Her mother, Patricia, was a force of nature. She was involved in every social organization in town, knew everyone's secrets, and had opinions about everything. When Sarah and I started dating, Patricia welcomed me into their family with open arms. She would cook elaborate dinners for us, include me in their family traditions, and constantly tell me how lucky Sarah was to have found someone like me. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. But when you're in love, you tend to interpret manipulation as care and possessiveness as devotion. Patricia had this way of making subtle comments about my finances that I brushed off as maternal concern. She would say things like, "Sarah deserves someone who can really take care of her," or, "I hope you're being smart with all that money your grandmother left you." Sarah, meanwhile, started becoming more interested in my business and my financial situation. She would ask questions about property values, insurance policies, and investment accounts. I thought she was just trying to understand my world better, preparing for our future together. I was so wrong. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in June. We had booked the nicest venue in town, hired a top-tier catering company, and sent invitations to over 200 guests. Sarah had insisted on a large, elaborate celebration, and I was happy to give her everything she wanted. The total cost was approaching $50,000, but I didn't care. I was marrying the woman I loved, and money seemed irrelevant. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah moved into my house. She said it would be easier for wedding planning and that it would help us adjust to married life. I thought it was romantic. She immediately started making changes, redecorating rooms, organizing my office, and familiarizing herself with every aspect of my home and business. Patricia was around constantly during this time, helping with wedding preparations and offering unsolicited advice about everything from the flower arrangements to my investment portfolio. She had somehow gotten involved in meetings with my accountant and lawyer, claiming she was just trying to help us prepare for married life. I was too busy with work and wedding stress to pay close attention to what was happening. The night before our wedding, I was at home while Sarah was having her bachelorette party at a hotel downtown. I had planned to spend the evening relaxing, maybe watching a movie, and getting a good night's sleep before the big day. Instead, I discovered something that would change my life forever. Around 10 o'clock, I realized I had left some important documents in my office at the construction company. I needed them for a meeting the following week, so I drove over to pick them up. As I was leaving the building, I noticed Patricia's car parked behind the office. The lights were on in the conference room, which struck me as odd since no one should have been there. I went back inside to investigate, and heard voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see Patricia sitting at the table with papers spread out in front of her. She was on the phone, and what I heard next made my blood run cold. "The wedding is tomorrow, so we need to move quickly," Patricia was saying. "Once they're married, we can start the process. David's already signed the preliminary papers giving Sarah power of attorney for medical decisions, but we need to expand that to financial matters. I pressed closer to the door, my heart pounding. The business is worth at least $2 million, plus there's the property portfolio from his grandmother. Patricia continued. Sarah's been documenting everything. We have photos of all his financial records, copies of his insurance policies, and we know where he keeps his important documents. There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's completely smitten with Sarah, and he trusts me completely. The man actually gave me copies of his keys so I could help with wedding preparations. Can you believe that? I felt sick. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. The plan is simple, Patricia went on. After the honeymoon, Sarah will start taking a more active role in the business. We'll gradually isolate him from his friends and family, make him more dependent on us. Then we'll start the process of transferring assets. If he becomes a problem, we have documentation of his drinking habits and some mental health issues we can exploit. I had never had mental health issues, and while I occasionally had a beer or two, I certainly didn't have drinking problems. But I realized they had been setting me up, creating a narrative that could be used against me. Sarah's been collecting evidence of his erratic behavior for months, Patricia said with a laugh. She's good at pushing his buttons and then documenting his reactions. We have videos of him losing his temper, photos of him drinking, and witnesses who will testify that he's been unstable. I thought about the times Sarah had seemed to provoke arguments over nothing, how she would bring up topics she knew would upset me, and how she always seemed to have her phone ready to record our conversations. I had thought she was just being modern, always documenting our relationship for social media. The beauty of this plan is that it's completely legal, Patricia continued. Once they're married, Sarah will gradually gain control of everything. If David tries to resist, we'll have him declared mentally incompetent. Dr. Williams is already on board, and he'll testify that David has been showing signs of depression and anxiety. A few more documented incidents, and we'll have enough for a court order. Dr. Williams was Sarah's boss at the clinic where she worked. I had met him several times and had even considered him a friend. The betrayal was overwhelming. Sarah should be getting back from her bachelorette party soon, Patricia said. She's been texting me updates all night. The other bridesmaids think she's just nervous about the wedding, but she's actually excited about tomorrow being the beginning of the end for David. I had heard enough. I quietly left the building, my mind reeling with what I had just discovered. The woman I loved, the woman I was going to marry in less than 12 hours, was planning to systematically steal everything I owned and destroy my life in the process. I drove home in a daze, trying to process what I had learned. When I got there, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house I had shared with Sarah for the past 3 weeks. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. I went inside and looked around with new eyes. I noticed things I had missed before. Sarah's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and when I looked at the screen, I saw a detailed spreadsheet listing all of my assets, including properties, bank accounts, and investments. There were notes about which assets would be easiest to transfer and which ones might require more elaborate planning. In the bedroom, I found a notebook hidden in Sarah's dresser drawer. It was filled with detailed notes about my daily routines, my relationships with friends and family, and my emotional triggers. There were pages of strategies for isolating me from my support system and making me more dependent on her and Patricia. Most disturbing were the pages documenting what she called emotional incidents. She had recorded dates, times, and detailed descriptions of every argument we had ever had, but her versions were completely distorted. According to her notes, I was controlling, jealous, and prone to violent outbursts. None of it was true, but she had crafted a narrative that painted me as an unstable and potentially dangerous person. I found photos she had taken of me during private moments, times when I was stressed about work or upset about something unrelated to our relationship. In the photos, I looked angry and unstable, but I remembered the actual moments, and they were nothing like what the images suggested. There were also copies of documents I had never seen before. Sarah had somehow obtained copies of my medical records, including notes from a therapist I had seen briefly after my father's death 2 years earlier. She had highlighted sections that mentioned grief and anxiety, and there were handwritten notes about how this information could be used to support claims of mental instability. I spent the entire night going through everything, trying to understand the scope of their plan. It was sophisticated and thorough. They had been working on this for months, possibly from the very beginning of our relationship. As the sun came up on what should have been my wedding day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them destroy me, and I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know what they were planning. I was going to fight back. I started by calling my lawyer, Mark Stevens, who was also supposed to be a guest at the wedding. I woke him up and told him I needed to see him immediately. He was confused and concerned, but he agreed to meet me at his office. When I showed Mark everything I had discovered, his face went pale. He immediately began making phone calls, starting with the bank to freeze my accounts and prevent any unauthorized transfers. We spent the morning securing my assets and documenting everything Sarah and Patricia had done. "David, this is serious," Mark said as we reviewed the evidence. "What they're planning could be considered fraud, conspiracy, and possibly even identity theft. You need to protect yourself legally, but you also need to be careful about how you handle this situation." I knew he was right. I had to be smart about this. If I simply confronted Sarah and Patricia without proper preparation, they could turn the situation around and make me look like the villain. By noon, I had secured my finances, changed all my passwords, and documented everything I had found. I had also installed security cameras in my house and made copies of all the evidence. I was ready to confront them. Sarah came home around 2 o'clock, expecting to find me getting ready for our wedding. Instead, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with all of her notes and documents spread out in front of me. "David, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice immediately taking on a concerned tone. "We need to start getting ready. The wedding is in 4 hours. "There's not going to be a wedding, Sarah," I said calmly. "I know what you and your mother have been planning." For just a moment, I saw her mask slip. There was no surprise, no confusion, just cold calculation as she quickly assessed the situation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I heard your mother on the phone last night," I continued. "I found your notebooks, your spreadsheets, your photos. I know everything." Sarah's demeanor changed completely. The warm, loving woman I thought I knew disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You were spying on me," she said accusingly. "You went through my private things. That's a violation of trust, David." I almost laughed at the irony. "A violation of trust? Sarah, you've been planning to steal everything I own and have me declared mentally incompetent. And you're talking to me about trust? You're being paranoid," she said, but she was already moving toward the door. "This is exactly the kind of behavior I've been worried about. You're not thinking clearly." I realized she was still trying to manipulate me, even when caught red-handed. She was trying to make me doubt what I had seen and heard with my own eyes. "I have recordings, Sarah," I said, which was partially true. I had made audio recordings of Patricia's phone conversation. "I have documentation of everything. It's over." That's when she finally dropped the act completely. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice filled with venom. "You think you can just humiliate me and my family and get away with it? You think you can destroy my reputation and face no consequences?" "I'm not trying to destroy anyone," I said. "I'm just protecting myself from people who are planning to destroy me." "No one will believe you," Sarah said. "Everyone in this town knows you've been unstable since your father died. They'll think you've finally snapped." I realized that this was probably true. Sarah and Patricia were well respected in the community, and they had spent months building a narrative about my supposed mental health issues. If I simply told people what had happened, many of them would probably assume I was having some kind of breakdown. "Maybe not," I said. "But I have evidence, and I have lawyers. And I'm not going to let you destroy me." Sarah left the house, and within an hour, my phone was ringing constantly. The first calls were from confused wedding guests who had arrived at the venue to find it empty. Then came calls from friends and family members who had heard various versions of what had happened. Patricia had moved quickly to control the narrative. According to her version of events, I had suffered some kind of mental breakdown and had accused Sarah of trying to steal from me. She told people that I had been acting erratically for weeks and that Sarah had been trying to help me, but I had become paranoid and delusional. The story spread through our small town like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew that David Henderson had lost his mind and destroyed his own wedding with crazy accusations against his innocent fiancée and her devoted mother. Most of my friends initially tried to be supportive, but as Patricia's version of events became more elaborate and more widely accepted, people began to distance themselves from me. The story evolved over the following days and weeks, becoming more dramatic with each telling. According to the town gossip, I had always been unstable, but Sarah's love and Patricia's maternal guidance had been keeping me grounded. When the pressure of the wedding became too much, I had snapped and created an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid the commitment I was afraid to make. People began to look at me differently. Conversation stopped when I entered a room. Former friends avoided me at the grocery store. Clients started canceling contracts with my construction company, claiming they were concerned about my mental state. Sarah and Patricia played their parts perfectly. Sarah was the heartbroken fiancée who had tried to love a troubled man, but had finally been forced to accept that he was too damaged to save. Patricia was the protective mother who had seen the warning signs but had hoped love would be enough to heal me. They gave interviews to the local newspaper, describing their ordeal and asking for privacy during this difficult time. They started a support group for families dealing with mental illness, positioning themselves as advocates and experts on the subject. Meanwhile, I was being painted as an unstable, potentially dangerous man who had traumatized two innocent women with my paranoid delusions. My lawyer advised me to keep a low profile while he worked on building a case, but the damage to my reputation was happening faster than we could counter it. The worst part was that some of the people I had considered close friends began to believe the narrative. They started sharing stories of times when I had seemed off or aggressive. These were usually normal human reactions to stress or frustration, but in the context of Patricia's campaign, they were being reinterpreted as evidence of instability. My business began to suffer seriously. Word spread that I was unreliable and potentially dangerous. Clients who had worked with me for years suddenly found reasons to terminate contracts. New customers stopped calling. My employees began to worry about their job security. I realized that staying in town was not an option. Patricia and Sarah had successfully turned the entire community against me, and there was no path back to a normal life there. Even if I eventually proved my case in court, the damage to my reputation would be permanent. 3 months after the wedding that never was, I made the decision to leave. I sold my house, liquidated my business, and moved across the country to Seattle. It was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made, but it was also necessary for my survival. Starting over in a new city was both terrifying and liberating. I had to rebuild my professional reputation from scratch, but I also had the opportunity to create a life free from the toxic dynamics that had nearly destroyed me. I found work with a large construction company, initially as a project manager. My skills and experience were valuable, and within 6 months, I was promoted to a senior position. I rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood and began the slow process of rebuilding my life. The hardest part was learning to trust again. The betrayal I had experienced was so complete and so devastating that I found it difficult to form new relationships. I went to therapy, which helped me understand how I had been manipulated and how to recognize red flags in future relationships. I also spent time reflecting on the signs I had missed. Looking back, I could see that Sarah's interest in me had always been focused on my financial situation. Her questions about my business, her eagerness to move in with me, her mother's involvement in my financial planning, all of these were warning signs that I had ignored because I was in love. I learned that what I had experienced was not uncommon. There are people who specifically target individuals for their financial assets, and they are often skilled at manipulation and deception. The internet is full of stories similar to mine, people who discovered that their partners were planning to steal from them or manipulate them for financial gain. After I moved to Seattle, I tried to keep track of what was happening back home. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned that Sarah and Patricia had continued their campaign against me even after I left town. They had started a blog about their experience with domestic psychological manipulation and had become local celebrities of sorts. They spoke at conferences about recognizing the signs of mental illness in relationships and had even written a book about their ordeal. They had turned their failed scheme into a successful grift, profiting from the very lies they had told about me. But then something interesting happened. About a year after I left town, I received a call from Mark Stevens, my lawyer. He told me that another man had come forward with a similar story about Sarah and Patricia. This man, whose name was James, had been dating Sarah before she met me. According to his account, Sarah and Patricia had run a similar scheme on him, but he had discovered their plan before they could execute it. He had left town quietly, afraid that no one would believe him. James had been following the story of our failed wedding and had recognized the pattern. He had documented his own experience, and was willing to testify about what Sarah and Patricia had done to him. With James's testimony and the evidence I had collected, Mark believed we could build a strong case against Sarah and Patricia. But he warned me that pursuing legal action would mean returning to face the community that had turned against me. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted justice, wanted to expose Sarah and Patricia for what they really were. But another part of me had moved on and didn't want to relive the trauma of what they had done to me. In the end, I decided to pursue the case. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I realized that Sarah and Patricia were probably targeting other men, and someone needed to stop them. The legal process was long and difficult. I had to return to Ohio several times for depositions and court appearances. Each time, I faced the stares and whispers of people who still believed I was the villain in this story. But James's testimony was powerful, and the evidence was overwhelming. During the trial, other men came forward with similar stories. It turned out that Sarah and Patricia had been running variations of this scheme for years, targeting men who were financially successful but emotionally vulnerable. The trial revealed the full scope of their operation. They had a network of accomplices, including Dr. Williams, who would provide false medical testimony when needed. They had relationships with certain lawyers and court officials who could help them navigate the legal system. The evidence showed that they had successfully executed their scheme against at least 3 other men before attempting it on me. In each case, they had managed to gain control of significant assets before their victims realized what was happening. The jury found Sarah and Patricia guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and several other charges. They were sentenced to prison time and ordered to pay restitution to their victims. The verdict was front-page news in the local newspaper, and suddenly the story everyone thought they knew was revealed to be a lie. People who had shunned me and believed the worst about me had to confront the fact that they had been manipulated by master manipulators. I received dozens of calls and messages from people apologizing for how they had treated me. Some were sincere, others seemed motivated more by guilt than genuine remorse. I appreciated the apologies, but I also realized that the damage had been done. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. The trial also revealed how sophisticated Sarah and Patricia's manipulation had been. They had studied psychology and had specifically targeted men who were dealing with grief, loneliness, or other emotional vulnerabilities. They knew how to present themselves as loving and supportive while slowly building a case for their victims' instability. They had used classic techniques of psychological manipulation, including gaslighting, isolation, and gradual escalation of control. They had created situations designed to provoke emotional reactions, then documented those reactions as evidence of mental instability. Looking back, I realized that my relationship with Sarah had never been real. From the very beginning, she had been playing a role, presenting herself as the person she thought I wanted her to be. Every conversation, every shared moment, every expression of love had been calculated and false. The betrayal was complete and devastating, but it also taught me valuable lessons about human nature and the importance of trust. I learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. I also learned that recovery from this kind of betrayal is possible, but it takes time and effort. I had to rebuild not just my life, but my ability to trust and to form healthy relationships. After the trial, I decided to stay in Seattle. I had built a new life there, and I didn't want to go back to the place where I had been so thoroughly betrayed. I had found peace in my new city, and I didn't want to risk losing that. My construction business in Seattle had grown significantly, and I was able to buy a house in a neighborhood I loved. I had made new friends who knew nothing about my past and judged me only on who I was in the present. I also met someone new, a woman named Lisa who was kind, genuine, and had her own successful career. Our relationship developed slowly, built on honesty and mutual respect. I was careful not to let my past experiences poison what we were building together. Lisa knew about what had happened to me, but she judged me on my actions, not on the lies that had been told about me. She helped me understand that not everyone is capable of the kind of deception that Sarah and Patricia had practiced, and that it was okay to trust again. We've been together for 2 years now, and I'm learning to believe in love again. But I'm also more careful, more aware of red flags, and more protective of my emotional and financial well-being. The experience changed me in ways that are both positive and negative. I'm more cautious in relationships, which has probably saved me from other potential problems. But I'm also more guarded, and it took a long time for me to open up to Lisa and to trust her completely. I think about Sarah and Patricia sometimes, wondering if they've learned anything from their experience, or if they're simply angry that they got caught. I hope they've found a way to live honestly, but I suspect they probably blame everyone but themselves for what happened. The small town where I used to live has never been the same for me. Even though I was vindicated in court, the damage to my reputation and my relationships there was permanent. The people who turned against me based on lies may have apologized, but they also showed me who they really were when it mattered. I learned that community support is conditional and that people are often more willing to believe dramatic stories than boring truths. The narrative of a mentally unstable man destroying his own wedding was more interesting than the reality of a calculated scheme to steal someone's assets. But I also learned that it's possible to rebuild after betrayal, to create a new life based on honesty and genuine relationships. It's not easy, and it takes time, but it's possible. I'm sharing this story because I want people to understand that financial fraud in relationships is real and devastating. It's not just about the money, though that's certainly important. It's about the complete betrayal of trust, the manipulation of emotions, and the systematic destruction of someone's life. If you're in a relationship where your partner seems overly interested in your finances, where they're pushing for rapid commitment, or where they're trying to isolate you from friends and family, pay attention to those red flags. Trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to investigate if something feels wrong. I also want people to understand that victims of this kind of fraud often face additional trauma when their communities don't believe them. The manipulators are often skilled at controlling the narrative and painting their victims as the problem. This secondary trauma can be just as devastating as the original betrayal. Recovery is possible, but it requires support, time, and often professional help. If you're dealing with something similar, know that you're not alone and that there are people who will believe you and help you rebuild. My life is good now. I have a successful business, a loving relationship, and a community that knows and respects me. The betrayal that nearly destroyed me ultimately taught me valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who genuinely care about you. I still sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard that phone conversation. Would Sarah and Patricia have succeeded in their plan? Would I have spent years being slowly manipulated and controlled before finally realizing what was happening? I'm grateful every day that I discovered the truth when I did. It saved me from years of abuse and manipulation, and it gave me the opportunity to build a life based on honesty and genuine connection. The wedding that never was turned out to be the best thing that never happened to me. It saved my life, my sanity, and my future. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives turn out to be the moments that save us from something even worse. Today, I'm stronger, wiser, and more careful about who I trust. I've learned to recognize the difference between someone who loves me and someone who wants to use me. I've learned that real love doesn't require you to give up your independence or your critical thinking. I've also learned that justice is possible, even when it seems like the whole world is against you. The truth has a way of emerging, even when it's buried under layers of lies and manipulation. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope you'll take something valuable from it. Whether it's awareness of the warning signs of financial fraud in relationships, understanding of how manipulation works, or simply the knowledge that recovery and rebuilding are possible after betrayal. I also hope you'll share your own experiences if you've been through something similar. The more we talk about these issues, the more we can help others avoid the trap I fell into. And if you found this story helpful or eye-opening, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this one. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most painful experiences, and sharing them can help others avoid similar pain. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who might be facing a similar situation. Remember, trust your instincts, protect yourself, and never be afraid to walk away from something that doesn't feel right, no matter how much you think you love someone. The truth will always come out eventually, and when it does, you want to be on the right side of it.